Okay, this is Mrs. H's feedback session from the mock, but hopefully it will help some of you when you're revising as well. So the question was, for this particular paper, a very nice, straightforward question: outline 2 features of the cognitive approach and explain 2 limitations, okay, for 8 marks. So the first thing you should always do is work out roughly what they're after. They want, look at this, it's 2 questions in one really. That's the first thing to spot. So outline 2 features, that's going to be half your marks, and explain 2 limitations, roughly half the marks. So roughly 4 marks there, roughly 4 marks here. And as it's 2 features, you've got 2 marks effectively for each feature, really is the way to look at it. Okay, and try to be quite methodical with that, because that will help to access all 8 marks. So features of cognitive, right, keeping it pretty straightforward. You know that we have, if I just make this a little bit bigger, we've got SOR. Cognitive approach deals with SOR, O being the key thing here, O being you, the organism, the mediational processes within you, the mediational processes that come between the stimulus and the response. And those mediational processes are what are affecting our behaviour. We could also talk about inferences, okay, so it's a key little buzzword that we could use. And basically what the cognitive approach do is they make inferences. Because we can't actually see these functions going on in the brain, we make models. We use something like the information processing model, so the mind can be compared with a computer. So we could take more marks down that route. We could talk about SOR and actually break that down even further. Or you could go on to a completely separate point. These internal processes can be studied scientifically, objectively, as in comparison with perhaps introspection, or in comparison with the behaviourists who just focus on the external, in comparison with the unconscious determinism of psychodynamic approach. So you could develop that even more, okay? But remember, you don't need a huge amount, because you're really just talking about a key point and then developing it. All right, for 2 of those. So those are just examples. In terms of limitations, we would want to say something like it's oversimplistic. All right, so we use a little phrase first of all, just like our Peel A3 sheets. We're going to state something nice and clearly. It's oversimplistic. What do we mean by that? And we develop it. For example, humans have emotions and motivations that affect our behavior. That's the key thing. We're always looking at what is this human behavior, and these factors affect our behavior, whereas they won't affect a computer, for example. So in other words, it's oversimplistic, it's limited, it's reductionist. There's various things you could say. We also have another point: external factors could play more of a role in causing behaviors, and that's slightly understated. We also have a limitation because there's a real scientific emphasis on being objective, and that means that we would predominantly use lab experiments, lab studies, which are fantastic in that they're very replicable, but obviously they lack mundane realism. And you guys have got examples like Peterson with the trigrams for memory, short-term memory. So you could just throw in a little point there. Don't spend ages on it, but just give a very brief illustration. Or you could go back to this idea about inferences and models. These models are very limited to making inferences, and we can't be certain of their accuracy. So there are various different things you could say. Remember though, 1 or 2 of you were really muddling up points with your essays. Remember, the cognitive approach doesn't really ignore biological influences. It's just that, the emphasis is on these mediational processes. So it's not completely ignoring them as in the behaviourist approach. It is different from that. And remember that we now have cognitive neuroscience, and obviously that is combining the cognitive with the biological. So it does focus on these mediational processes, but please don't say it ignores biological, because it doesn't really ignore them. Okay.